Lauren Carter, a black woman, a community advocate, and the wife of Dallas County's police commissioner, was just trying to get home after a charity event when red and blue lights changed everything. On a quiet street in suburban Texas, she was pulled over without cause, searched without consent, and treated like a suspect for no reason other than fitting a description. The officers didn't know who she was, but that was never the point, because what followed wasn't just a personal violation. It exposed a hidden history of misconduct, forced resignations inside the department, and gave rise to a national rights training program for communities of color. Now, her story has sparked national reform, and the question she asked at the end still echoes. If I weren't his wife, would I have been heard? Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Because after this, you may never see a routine stop the same way again. The video was already live. It jittered with motion, street lights flashing across the screen as a teenager holding her phone whispered behind the lens. Wait, is that Lauren Carter? That's the commissioner's wife, right? The shot steadied just long enough to capture a silver sedan idling on the side of a dark, quiet road. Two police cruisers had boxed it in. One officer was standing by the driver's side window. The other hovered near the rear, scanning the trunk with a flashlight. There were no sirens, no raised voices, just the kind of silent tension that buzzes louder than noise. The camera zoomed slightly. A flash of a sequined gown glinted from inside the car. The woman behind the wheel didn't appear agitated. She wasn't shouting. She was still. Then the footage cut. 32 minutes earlier, Lauren Carter merged onto a side street just beyond Route 75. The hum of traffic had faded behind her, replaced by the rhythmic squeak of her windshield wipers dragging across the glass. A light drizzle had started after the fundraiser. Nothing serious. Just enough to glisten the road and complicate her drive in heels. She had slipped off one shoe already, pressing the gas with her bare foot. The Unity Center event had gone longer than expected. Photos, speeches, a donor who wouldn't stop talking. But it had been worth it. The organization had hit its target for youth scholarships. They were going to fund 2 full summer mentorship cohorts. Lauren had handled the final speech. Clear, calm, committed. Her words had been well received, and not just out of politeness. She turned down Meadow Lane, a narrow suburban road bordered by trimmed hedges and dated lamp posts. The dashboard clock read 10:42 p.m. She glanced at her phone on the passenger seat. 4 missed calls from Daniel. She smiled to herself. He always overchecked when she drove alone. She didn't pick up, just a quiet, almost home, under her breath. Then came the lights. A sudden wash of red and blue exploded across the rear-view mirror. It lit the interior of her car like a strobe, swallowing the soft white glow of her dashboard in an instant. Reflex kicked in. She eased her foot off the gas, signaled, and pulled to the curb. Her brow furrowed, confusion setting in before fear could take root. She ran through a mental checklist. No speeding, no illegal turn, seatbelt on, no traffic violations. The taillights had been checked earlier that week. Everything was clean. Still, she turned off the engine, lowered the window halfway, and kept both hands on the steering wheel. The first officer, a large white man with squared shoulders and a rigid jawline, approached without hesitation. He wore dark, tactical gloves and held his flashlight upright, beam angled just below her eyes. "License and registration," he said. No greeting, no explanation. Lauren complied wordlessly, retrieving both from the console with the slow, deliberate movements. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been stopped?" He didn't respond at first. He glanced over her license. "This vehicle matches the description of one involved in a suspicious incident nearby." Lauren tilted her head slightly. "Suspicious incident?" she asked, voice measured. The officer leaned closer. "We're going to need you to step out of the car. No offense, she replied, "but I'd like to understand the reason for this request." "Out of the car." He emphasized each word louder this time. She hesitated for one breath, then unfastened her seatbelt and opened the door with care. As she stepped onto the pavement, another cruiser arrived. A second officer, younger and clearly less sure of himself, got out and joined the first near the back of the car. Lauren remained composed, her posture upright, arms at her sides. She had been in enough rooms to know that calm could be misread as compliance or defiance, but panic never helped anyone. "I'd like to call my husband," she said, plainly. "You can do that after we've finished," the first officer said. The second officer stepped closer. "Do you have any weapons in the car?" "No," she answered, unmoving. "You're welcome to ask, not to assume." The first officer began checking the rear license plate, then opened the trunk without asking. He flipped through the stack of brochures from the fundraiser, glanced inside a supply box, unzipped a bag of donation receipts, and tossed them back without care. Lauren watched silently. This wasn't new. It wasn't fair, but it was familiar. "I'm complying," she said, more to herself than to them. The second officer circled around, shining his light through the passenger window. Her phone buzzed again. "Daniel." She let it ring. "Do not reach inside," the younger officer warned, hand twitching toward his sidearm. Lauren didn't flinch. "I didn't move. Just saying," he mumbled, more out of reflex than necessity. A car slowed across the street. Someone leaned out with a phone, recording. Another onlooker across the sidewalk did the same. Then, silence, except for the idling engines and the distant hum of tires on wet asphalt. Another text buzzed. "May I answer my phone now?" Lauren asked. The first officer ignored her. The second stepped back. He looked uncertain, caught between orders and observation. Her tone, her restraint, the absence of aggression, it didn't match the narrative they were trained to expect. Still, no apology came, no explanation, no questions, only commands. She breathed in through her nose, slowly, keeping her hands visible. Then she heard it, a low engine growl, tires rolling soft over damp pavement. She turned her head slightly, eyes scanning the rearview mirror where those same red and blue lights still spun. And there it was, a third vehicle. Sleek, black, civilian. Moving with quiet purpose, it pulled in behind the last cruiser. The headlights shut off. The driver's door opened. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just watched. The cruiser's lights continued to spin, casting flashes across the quiet street like a warning no one could hear. Lauren stood at the edge of the curb, arms relaxed at her sides, face unreadable. Her car door remained open behind her. The first officer, tall, square-jawed, mid-40s, stepped closer with slow, heavy strides. His badge read Blake. The name fit. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask any further questions. He just pointed at her trunk and said, "Pop it." Lauren didn't move. "I'd like to know why I'm being detained." Blake folded his arms. "I already told you. We received a call about a vehicle matching your car's description involved in suspicious activity in this area. That's not an answer." "Suspicious how?" Her tone was even, unraised, but every word landed with precision. Blake's eyes narrowed. "Silver sedan, late model, woman driving alone. That's all the report said. There are 6 on this block alone," she said, "which is why we're investigating," he replied flatly. The second officer, Ruiz according to his name tag, stood by the passenger side, glancing back and forth between them. Younger, unsure. He kept his flashlight pointed down. Lauren turned slightly toward Blake. "So, to confirm, you stopped me because my car is silver. No speeding, no erratic driving, no traffic violation, just color and timing." He didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the handle and opened her trunk himself. The hinges creaked. Inside were boxes labeled with the Unity Center's logo, stacks of printed flyers, event lanyards, 2 clipboards, and a rolled-up event banner. Blake didn't examine them. He started digging through. "I do not consent to this search," Lauren said, projecting her voice clearly, loud enough for Ruiz and anyone else within range to hear. "Noted," Blake said without looking up, "but your car matches the call. That's not how consent works." Ruiz shifted behind her. She glanced over her shoulder. He wasn't reaching for anything, just watching. She held his gaze a second longer than necessary. "I've given you my license and registration. Both are valid," Lauren continued. "I haven't broken any laws. I haven't been informed of a charge or specific suspicion, yet you've opened my trunk without cause or warrant." Blake shut the trunk hard enough that the license plate frame rattled. "We're doing our job, ma'am. We take suspicious activity seriously." "So do I," she said, "especially when it's used as a cover for profiling." He stepped toward her, not aggressively, but close enough that she had to decide whether to move or stay still. She stayed still. "Are you accusing me of something?" he asked. "I'm stating what's obvious," she replied. "This isn't procedure. It's a performance." Blake's jaw tightened. Ruiz cleared his throat. "Dispatch confirms her license is clean. No outstanding warrants. Vehicle registered to Lauren Carter. Dallas address. No history." Blake didn't acknowledge him. He walked around to the driver's side and peered inside the car. The dome light glowed softly, illuminating the passenger seat, where Lauren's phone sat face down, still buzzing with missed calls. "Do not enter my vehicle," she said firmly. "Step away from the door," Blake ordered. "You're already inside my trunk," she said. "How much more access do you think you're entitled to?" Ruiz took a step forward. "Sergeant, she's not being uncooperative. Maybe we should slow this down. We're already in it," Blake snapped, "and she's not calling anyone until we're done." Lauren looked directly at Ruiz. "Is that policy?" Ruiz hesitated. "It's case by case, so not policy," she said. Blake leaned into the car. His flashlight passed over the dashboard, the cup holders, the passenger seat. Then he opened the glove compartment. Inside were a few napkins, an expired parking pass, and a copy of the fundraiser program from the Unity Center. He picked it up, squinted at it, then tossed it onto the seat. "What were you doing tonight?" he asked. "Speaking at a community event," she replied. "Room full of donors, teachers, students. Would you like the live stream link?" No need for sarcasm. No need for interrogation. He straightened. "You got answers for everything, don't you? I'm used to being asked the same questions over and over by people who think silence equals guilt." He stepped back from the car. "So you're making this political now?" "No," she said. "You did that when you decided this car, this dress, and this skin matched your profile." Ruiz looked down. A distant engine hum broke the silence. Blake's head turned. Lauren didn't move. Another vehicle was approaching, smooth and steady. No lights, no sirens. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Blake noticed it too now. His posture changed, subtle but sharp. He walked slowly toward the center of the road, trying to get a better look. Ruiz stayed near the car, flashlight lowered, breathing shallow. The SUV turned onto the street, its headlights slicing through the mist. It was dark, government black, unmistakable in its design and confidence. The type of vehicle that didn't arrive unless someone important was inside. Lauren didn't flinch. Blake stepped out of its path, his hand drifting toward his belt, not to draw, but to steady himself. The SUV rolled to a stop behind the last cruiser. Engine idling, door clicking open. Lauren kept her gaze forward. Ruiz adjusted his stance. Blake muttered, "Who the hell is that?" Lauren didn't answer. She didn't have to. The lid of the glove compartment hung open, its contents scattered across the seat. An expired parking pass, receipts, a tube of lip balm, and a folded program from the Unity Center event. Blake flicked the flashlight over each item with mechanical detachment. He made no effort to replace anything or treat the interior with respect. The car wasn't evidence, but he was treating it like a crime scene. Lauren stood still by the curb. Her arms remained at her sides, her back straight. She wasn't afraid. She was watching. Every movement Blake made, every object displaced, every glance exchanged between the officers, she watched it all, filing it away, not for memory, but for testimony. When the time came, she'd remember everything. Ruiz hovered by the rear of the car. His flashlight beam drifted across the asphalt without aim. He wasn't looking for anything. He was buying time. His jaw was clenched, but he hadn't said a word in the last 2 minutes. His silence had weight. He shifted once, then again. His discomfort was becoming obvious. "Sergeant," he finally said, keeping his tone neutral, "we've run everything. She's clean. Registration matches. License is active. No alerts." Blake didn't respond. He continued rummaging through the center console. He picked up a folded envelope and cracked it open without asking. Inside were handwritten thank you notes from the fundraiser. He skimmed one, scoffed, and tossed it onto the passenger floorboard. Lauren spoke, her voice even. "That's personal correspondence. You have no right." Blake didn't look at her. "You're obstructing an investigation, ma'am." "There is no investigation," she said. "There's profiling." Ruiz took a step forward. "Sergeant, maybe we should slow this down." Blake finally turned to face him. "You got a problem, Ruiz?" "I think we've gone far enough," Ruiz replied, voice steady but low. "We have no cause. We have no complaint. This is escalating for no reason." Blake's eyes narrowed. "We got a suspicious vehicle call. That gives us discretion. It doesn't give us authority to tear through her belongings," Ruiz said. "And it doesn't override the Fourth Amendment." Blake stepped toward him, chest squared. "If you're questioning command, file it in your report. But out here, I call the shots." Ruiz said nothing, but he didn't step back. Lauren watched the exchange without interrupting. She could see the shift happening, the fracture forming. Ruiz wasn't ready to defy a superior, but he was close. His conscience was louder than protocol, and it was beginning to show in his posture. Blake moved past him, circling to the back of the vehicle again. He opened the trunk once more and pulled out a plastic bin filled with fundraiser brochures. He held one up, flipping through it like it was a criminal file. "What's all this?" he asked. "Educational materials," Lauren said. "They were passed out to donors and guests. Would you like a copy?" Blake ignored her sarcasm and dropped the stack back into the bin. He leaned on the edge of the trunk, exhaling as if the weight of his own actions was suddenly inconvenient. Lauren took a step forward. "I'm going to retrieve my phone from the front seat and call my husband. I'm informing you, not requesting permission." Blake's head snapped toward her. "Don't move," Ruiz intervened. "She's unarmed. We've already cleared the vehicle." Blake didn't respond. Lauren remained still. "You've searched everything without reason. You've found nothing. I've complied fully. I've said nothing inflammatory, yet you continue. This isn't suspicion, it's humiliation." Blake approached her again, slowly. "Ma'am, you don't get to decide how we handle field calls, and you don't get to decide when the Constitution applies," she replied. Ruiz lowered his flashlight. "Let her make the call." Blake turned toward him. "You're done speaking." "No, I'm not," Ruiz said, voice firmer now. "This is wrong. It's been wrong from the start." Blake took a long breath, then looked back at Lauren. "Who is it you're trying so hard to call?" She didn't hesitate. "Daniel Carter. Blake raised an eyebrow. And who's that? My husband. Blake waited, as if expecting more. He a lawyer? Ruiz looked up sharply. Lauren smiled faintly. No, he's the Dallas County Police Commissioner. Blake didn't speak. His face shifted, a flicker of awareness pushing through his mask of control. Ruiz stepped back. The silence between them stretched out, heavy and telling. Lauren turned toward her car. I'm making the call. Blake didn't stop her this time. He didn't move. She picked up her phone from the passenger seat and dialed. It rang twice before being answered. Lauren? Daniel's voice came through instantly. Are you okay? She spoke calmly. They stopped me without cause. They've searched everything. They've ignored protocol. I'm safe, but I need you here. I'm already close, he said. Stay exactly where you are. She hung up and turned around, facing the officers. Blake's arms were crossed now. He wasn't moving, but he wasn't in control anymore either. Ruiz stood off to the side, visibly disengaged from Blake's decisions. His allegiance had shifted. Lauren stood still, eyes steady, and then headlights flooded the street from behind. The black SUV pulled up behind the last cruiser. Its engine cut off. The driver's door opened, but no one spoke. A man stepped out, tall, composed, in a dark tailored suit with a clipped badge at his belt. He shut the door with one fluid motion, each step forward measured and exact. Ruiz turned toward the sound. Blake remained in place, but something in his stance faltered. The man didn't look at either officer immediately. His eyes were on Lauren. She nodded once. Then he turned to face them. Daniel Carter stepped out of the vehicle, closing the door behind him with the kind of finality that said everything without a word. Daniel Carter stood still for a beat, letting the moment settle. The red and blue strobes from the cruiser bounced off the windows of the nearby houses, flickering across his suit and badge like a warning. His face was unreadable, but his presence was absolute. He didn't speak until he reached the edge of the scene, just behind Lauren, who turned toward him only slightly. Her expression remained composed, but the momentary shift in her shoulders told him everything he needed to know. He faced the officers. Sergeant Blake was the first to meet his eyes. Ruiz lingered behind, clearly aware of the dynamic change unfolding in front of them. Daniel didn't raise his voice, didn't flash his badge, didn't rush into confrontation. He simply spoke, with tone and tempo that made it clear who he was and what he expected. Good evening. I'm Daniel Carter, Dallas County Police Commissioner. The title hung in the air like a challenge. He paused, allowing it to land. Now, I'd like someone to explain to me why my wife is standing on the side of the road while her car is being searched without a warrant or a stated cause. Blake cleared his throat, posturing to respond. Sir, we received a call about a vehicle matching this one involved in... Daniel cut him off. Matching how? The make, the model, the driver's skin color? Blake hesitated. Silver sedan, female driver, late model, in this area. We acted on that. You acted on a vague description and assumed probable cause. Daniel stepped forward, slow but steady. Do you know how many silver sedans are registered in this zip code alone? Blake's posture stiffened. We were conducting a routine stop, sir. Routine. Daniel repeated, almost like a question. Is it also routine to open someone's trunk without asking, to enter a vehicle without consent, to deny someone the right to make a phone call while being detained? Ruiz shifted awkwardly behind Blake. His eyes met Daniel's, then dropped. Daniel turned to Lauren. Did they ever explain why they pulled you over? No, she said calmly. I asked. They refused. They wouldn't let me call. They treated me like a suspect from the moment they stepped out of the car. He looked back at the officers, his expression hardening. Then I suggest we drop the word routine from this conversation. Blake's jaw clenched. Commissioner, we didn't know who she was. That's exactly the problem, Daniel interrupted, voice rising just enough to carry. It shouldn't matter who she is. She could be a nurse, a teacher, a student. This is not about who you stopped. It's about how you treated her. The air shifted. Nearby, the sound of another phone clicking into video mode broke the quiet. Someone in the growing crowd had stepped closer. A neighbor had come out onto their porch. Someone else leaned against a parked car across the street, filming. The entire block was now watching what was no longer a traffic stop, but a public reckoning. Ruiz cleared his throat. "Sir, Daniel raised a hand slightly. "Don't bother. You had your moment. You stood by while this happened. Now it's my turn to ask the questions." Blake stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "Commissioner, we had no intent to escalate anything. We were just following protocol." Daniel shook his head. "Protocol doesn't authorize illegal searches. It doesn't justify intimidation. It doesn't excuse refusing a citizen the right to contact their family. It doesn't suspend the Constitution because your gut tells you something feels off." Blake's face darkened. "With respect, sir, you weren't here." "No, I wasn't. But I've read more after-action reports and body cam footage than you've written tickets. And I've spent 20 years trying to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people we're sworn to protect. You just set that back tonight with one traffic stop." The silence was complete now. No one moved. The only sound was the low hum of cruiser engines and the occasional flicker of static from a shoulder radio. Daniel continued. "You didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. You searched her car like you were expecting a confession to fall out of the glove box. You denied her basic rights because you could. And now you're hoping this all goes away quietly." Blake said nothing. Daniel took another step forward, now just feet from the man. "But here's what you don't realize. This didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened on camera. It happened in front of witnesses. It happened to someone who won't stay silent. And it happened to someone whose husband knows exactly how the system works and how to dismantle it when it doesn't." Lauren remained silent through all of it. She didn't need to add anything. Daniel's voice was calm, measured, but it landed with the precision of a prosecutor's closing argument. One of the neighbors across the street called out, "Is this being recorded?" Another answered, "Already on TikTok, over 10,000 views." Daniel turned slightly toward them. "Keep filming. Everyone should see what justice looks like when it finally confronts arrogance." He turned back to Blake. "Now, unless you'd like to read her Miranda rights, for a reason you still haven't stated, I suggest you step away from the vehicle." Blake glanced at Ruiz, then at the crowd, then at the cruiser behind him. His face had turned pale beneath the flashing lights. Daniel didn't wait for agreement. He opened the driver's door himself and motioned for Lauren. She walked toward him slowly, never turning her back on the officers. When she reached him, he placed a hand gently on her back and helped her into the seat. Then he closed the door and faced them again. "Consider this your moment of accountability. The reports will be filed. The footage is already public. I suggest you start preparing your statements." Blake said nothing. Ruiz looked down. The tension had shifted entirely. Daniel no longer needed to raise his voice. The scene had flipped. The ones with the power were now the ones explaining themselves. The ones with the uniforms were the ones surrounded. And Daniel Carter wasn't done. The flashing lights from the cruisers lit the street in pulses of red and blue, but the real pressure came from the silence. It wasn't the silence of calm. It was the silence that followed a line being crossed. The silence of witnesses holding their breath, phones recording from every angle, waiting to see what came next. Daniel Carter stood at the center of it, arms at his sides, shoulders square, gaze locked on the two officers who had turned a routine stop into a spectacle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let's walk through this again," he said slowly. You stopped my wife with no probable cause. You never told her what crime she was suspected of. You denied her request to make a phone call. Then you proceeded to open her trunk, her glove box, and her personal belongings without consent or warrant. Is that accurate?" Sergeant Blake stayed frozen, his mouth slightly open as if weighing which version of the truth might sound less incriminating. Officer Ruiz stood behind him, avoiding eye contact. His flashlight was now clipped back to his vest, unused. Daniel took a step forward. "Was there any point in this stop where she gave you permission to search her vehicle?" Blake cleared his throat but said nothing. "I'll take that as a no," Daniel continued. "Did you have a warrant?" "No, sir," Ruiz answered quietly. Daniel turned to him. "Thank you for your honesty." The small crowd that had gathered along the sidewalk inched closer, their phones still recording. Someone muttered, "That's the commissioner, isn't it?" A teenager replied, "Yeah, and they messed up bad." Daniel gestured to the surrounding phones. "I want you to take a good look around. You see these people? They're not just bystanders, they're witnesses. Everything you've done here is on record, multiple angles, real time. You've not only violated the departmental policy, you've put this department's reputation on the line for what? A gut feeling?" Blake shifted, arms crossed tightly, jaw locked. Daniel continued. "You searched her car because she fit a vague description. Silver sedan, female driver. That's it. You use that as justification to ignore every layer of procedure we train our officers to follow. Do you understand the liability you've just created?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Daniel stared at Blake, waiting. Blake muttered, "We were acting in good faith." Daniel stepped closer. "Good faith does not suspend the Fourth Amendment. Good faith does not allow you to rifle through a citizen's belongings without cause. Good faith doesn't deny someone their basic rights and hope nobody notices." The tension in Blake's posture broke just enough to show discomfort. Ruiz, meanwhile, had backed toward his cruiser, arms folded, visibly disengaged. Daniel turned slightly to the crowd, raising his voice just enough to carry. "This is what happens when procedure is replaced with assumption, when authority is confused with immunity, when power is used not to protect, but to intimidate." A small ripple of agreement came from the crowd. Some nodded. Others simply kept recording. He looked back at the officers. "Now, let me be clear. This will not be buried in a report. This will not disappear into internal memos. This will be addressed publicly and formally." Lauren stood nearby, quiet, composed. She didn't need to add anything. Her silence had weight. She had already spoken the most damning truth by existing in this moment visibly dignified and unjustly humiliated. Daniel turned back to Blake. "Who was your supervisor on duty when you initiated this stop?" Blake hesitated. "Lieutenant Wallace." "Then call him. Now." Blake blinked. "Sir, I think that wasn't a suggestion," Daniel said. "This situation is no longer in your hands. Call your supervisor and have him report to this location immediately." Ruiz reached for his radio without waiting for permission. The crowd stirred as he spoke into the mic, his voice low but audible. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24 requesting Lieutenant Wallace to report to our location on Meadow and Knox. Code 3. Repeat, Code 3. A woman across the street murmured, "Code 3? That's for priority response." Another voice chimed in. "Means they know this is serious." Blake looked at Daniel again, as if trying to gauge whether some line of negotiation was still open. There wasn't. Daniel pointed to the cruiser. "And until he gets here, I suggest you step away from the vehicle. This is now a matter of internal accountability." Blake didn't move. Daniel's tone hardened. "Step away from the vehicle." Blake backed off slowly. Daniel turned to Ruiz. "What's your badge number?" 6813, Ruiz said. Good. I'll be noting it in my report, as the only officer here who acknowledged protocol and spoke truthfully. Ruiz nodded once. Daniel scanned the crowd again. More people were recording now. Someone across the street had started live streaming to Facebook. Another was tagging news stations on Twitter. A local journalist had just pulled up, camera ready, mic in hand. What started as a silent traffic stop had become a scene. Daniel stepped beside Lauren, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. "You okay?" She nodded. "I'm fine. Just waiting for this to be documented properly." "It will be," he said, "and then some." The cruiser's radios crackled faintly. Sirens sounded in the distance, closer every second. Ruiz stood with his arms crossed, shoulders squared. Blake paced behind his cruiser, no longer in control. Daniel looked back toward the approaching siren. His expression never changed. It didn't need to. He had turned the lights against the people who once used them as cover. The sound of sirens faded just as quickly as it arrived, replaced by a growing murmur from the crowd. What had started as a curious gathering of neighbors had evolved into something else, an audience with a purpose. Every person on the sidewalk now had a phone in hand. Some stood quietly filming. Others whispered to each other while their cameras rolled. A few began narrating for live streams already underway, their voices hushed but charged with urgency. One woman near the front of the group held her phone vertically, face turned to camera. "If you're just joining," she said, "this is real time from Meadow and Knox. A woman got pulled over. No reason. Turns out she's the police commissioner's wife. Yeah, you heard that right. And they searched her car. No warrant, no consent. This is happening now." The comments poured in faster than she could read them. Screenshots of the live stream were being clipped, reshared, reposted. Within minutes, #JusticeForLauren began to trend. By the time the second video hit Twitter, the number of viewers had already reached 5,000. Across town, someone who didn't even know Lauren saw the clip, screen recorded it, and added the caption, "You let this happen to her, what happens to the rest of us?" That tweet went viral within 7 minutes. Another post followed. "If this is how they treat the police commissioner's wife, imagine what they do to black women no one knows." Back at the scene, Daniel stood steady. His phone vibrated once in his jacket. He ignored it. Across the street, a local reporter had joined the crowd. She wasn't holding a microphone, just her phone, quietly recording. Her cameraman hadn't even unpacked the tripod. This story didn't need their setup. It was already telling itself. A teenager leaned against a mailbox and whispered to his friend, "They're done. This is going everywhere." His friend nodded, scrolling through a feed that was now almost entirely filled with clips from the block they stood on. Ruiz, standing between his cruiser and the crowd, began to feel the change. It wasn't just tension now. It was accountability pressing in from every angle. His posture changed. Not defensive, not combative, just exposed. Blake, pacing behind the first cruiser, pulled his radio to his shoulder, muttered something unintelligible, then clipped it back into place. His jaw was tight, movement sharp. He scanned the crowd and saw dozens of faces looking back without fear. No one was flinching. No one was backing off. Lauren remained in the driver's seat now, door still open, feet on the pavement. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't making a scene. She was just there, visible, undeniable. And she knew the power of that visibility. A woman stepped forward from the sidewalk, phone in hand, not aiming it at anyone but recording nonetheless. "We stand with you, ma'am," she said softly. Lauren met her eyes. "Thank you." Daniel turned and took in the scene. He could see the shift. Authority was no longer defined by who wore a badge. It was being rewritten in real time by whoever held a camera, whoever typed a caption, whoever decided that silence wasn't enough. Someone shouted from across the street, "It's already on the news!" Another voice added, "My cousin in Atlanta just texted me. He saw the clip." Within seconds, new tags began circulating. #search without cause, #Carter stop, @Dallas PD. Someone on Instagram paired the footage with the caption, "Lauren Carter deserves better. We all do." At that moment, Blake looked up. His eyes flicked toward Ruiz, then toward Daniel. His voice, when it came, was low and clipped. "They're going to blow this out of proportion." Daniel didn't move. "No, they're going to show exactly what happened." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but another engine cut through the night. A third SUV approached, larger, official, unmistakable in both design and timing. Its headlights dimmed as it came to a stop behind Daniel's vehicle. The logo on the door confirmed what no one needed to guess. This wasn't just another patrol unit. The passenger door opened. Out stepped Lieutenant Brian Wallace, pressed uniform, cap in hand, face taut. He didn't look confused. He looked annoyed. He surveyed the scene quickly. Cruisers, crowd, commissioner. His eyes landed on Lauren, then on Blake, then on Daniel. He didn't speak right away. Ruiz straightened instinctively. Blake tensed. Daniel turned calmly, nodded once. "Lieutenant." Wallace returned the nod, stepping closer. "Commissioner Carter." The crowd quieted as he approached, sensing the change. More phones lifted into the air, lenses trained on the new arrival. Daniel didn't waste time. "Your officers conducted an unauthorized vehicle search. No cause, no consent, no explanation. They denied my wife the right to contact family. Everything was caught on video. We need to talk." Wallace gave a tight nod. "Understood." But before Wallace could say anything else, someone in the crowd called out, "He's the one who's going to clean this up?" Laughter followed, not from humor, but from disbelief. Wallace glanced toward the sidewalk, but said nothing. He was a man used to making things go away. But nothing about tonight was going to disappear. Not with this many witnesses. Not with the public narrative already writing itself across every platform. Daniel motioned slightly. "We'll speak here, in front of them. Not in your vehicle, not behind a cruiser." Wallace adjusted his stance. "Commissioner, maybe we can de-escalate." Daniel shook his head. "No, we address it here, the same place it happened." Phones kept recording. No one looked away. Lieutenant Brian Wallace took a slow breath as he surveyed the scene from the edge of the sidewalk. The cruisers were parked at odd angles. Flashing lights cast long shadows over the pavement and onto the growing crowd. Civilians stood in tight clusters, some silent, others whispering, all of them holding up phones. From every direction he felt the pressure. Not from sirens or command radios, but from dozens of camera lenses recording his every move. He approached the commissioner without rushing. His expression was locked in place, the same calm but wary mask he wore during internal reviews and press briefings. But this wasn't a meeting behind closed doors. This was a spotlight he couldn't dim. Daniel Carter stood centered, feet planted, one hand resting on the open door of Lauren's car. He didn't speak until Wallace crossed the curb. "Lieutenant," Daniel said, "thank you for coming." Wallace offered a quick nod. "Commissioner." He turned briefly to the officers standing a few feet back. Ruiz looked tense but upright. Blake didn't move. Wallace's gaze returned to the scene. "Can someone tell me what exactly happened here?" Daniel motioned to Lauren, still seated in the car. Her posture was composed, but her eyes locked directly onto Wallace's. The lieutenant gave a courteous nod, neutral, professional, nothing more. Then he turned back to Daniel. "Is there a specific complaint?" Daniel didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked his own. "Do you recognize her?" Wallace's brow furrowed slightly. He looked back at Lauren. There was a pause, just long enough for the crowd to sense something had been missed. "She looks familiar," he said. Was she part of a city event? Daniel's face hardened. That is my wife, Lieutenant. Her name is Lauren Carter. Wallace's mouth opened, then shut. A second of hesitation passed between them. It was barely visible, but enough. The crowd felt it. Daniel stepped closer. But that's not what matters. Wallace kept his voice measured. Commissioner, Daniel cut him off. The issue here isn't whether you recognize her. The issue is that it shouldn't have made any difference. Whether she's a nurse, a business owner, or someone walking home from the store, she was entitled to be treated with basic dignity, and that did not happen here tonight. Wallace shifted his weight. I understand, but I haven't heard full details. Daniel raised a hand. Then let's clarify them now. 2 of your officers conducted a full search of her vehicle without consent. They denied her the right to contact her spouse. They opened her trunk, her glove box, her personal effects, without a warrant, without probable cause, and without explanation. I want to know if that aligns with your understanding of standard field procedure. Blake spoke for the first time since Wallace's arrival. Sir, we received a radio report of a vehicle matching the description. Wallace held up his hand. Sergeant, I'll ask the questions. Daniel didn't wait. No, you won't. Not yet. First, I'm asking you, did your officers have legal grounds for the search? Wallace glanced between the 2 men. His voice was quieter now. I need to review their body cam footage. Radio logs. Daniel cut in again. Do not deflect. This is not about paperwork. This is about what happened on this street, under your department's authority. These officers searched a private vehicle. Did they have legal grounds? Wallace drew a controlled breath. Not to my knowledge. Daniel nodded. Then say it plainly, because every phone out here has heard everything else. Wallace looked out at the crowd. Faces, cameras, tension. He turned back. No, Commissioner. If they proceeded without consent and without cause, then that was a violation of protocol. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Of protocol and policy and civil rights. Wallace exhaled. Yes, a murmur passed through the crowd. A moment of shared recognition. An officer had admitted it, on record. Lauren stepped out of the vehicle without speaking. She stood beside Daniel, facing Wallace. The street lights hit the sequins of her gown like shattered glass. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him. Wallace adjusted his stance. Mrs. Carter, I regret that this incident unfolded the way it did. I assure you it will be reviewed thoroughly. Lauren didn't blink. Would you say that if I didn't have this last name? Wallace hesitated. That's not. She spoke over him. Would you even be here? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Daniel stepped in again. We're past regret, Lieutenant. What's your immediate plan of action regarding these officers? Wallace's eyes flicked to Blake, then to Ruiz. Pending a formal review, both officers will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. More murmurs. Phones recorded the moment. Someone whispered, Finally. Daniel nodded once. Make the call. Wallace stepped away, radioed into dispatch, and issued the order. His voice was flat, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight of it. Daniel watched him finish, then looked back toward the crowd. Dozens of eyes were on him. He turned to Lauren. She gave a short nod. Daniel raised his voice, just loud enough to carry. You all heard it. The department will now act as it should have from the beginning. A ripple of agreement passed through the group. Someone clapped. Another echoed the words, Justice for Lauren. Wallace returned, his tone tighter. I'd like to begin collecting written statements and reviewing footage. We'll coordinate, Daniel interrupted him once more. And I want a copy of every recording submitted to Internal Affairs, unedited. No time gaps, from every camera and cruiser here tonight. Wallace gave a slow nod. Understood. Daniel stepped aside and glanced toward the crowd. If you have footage, please submit it to the Civilian Review Board. Email and Dropbox link will be posted by morning. People nodded, typing into phones. Lauren stood beside her husband, calm, resolute. The street was no longer just a street. It had turned into a stage. The flashing lights painted the pavement in strobing color, while dozens of phones stayed fixed on the trio at its center. Daniel Carter, his wife Lauren, and Lieutenant Wallace. The tension had stopped simmering. Now it boiled under every pair of watching eyes. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a reckoning in real time. Daniel stepped forward, breaking the brief pause that had followed Wallace's reluctant acknowledgement of policy violations. "Let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here," he said, voice projecting firmly but without shouting. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a technical misstep. This was an abuse of power, plain and simple." He turned to the crowd. "How many of you have been stopped like this before? How many of you know someone who has?" Hands rose. Quiet affirmations rolled through the onlookers like distant thunder. A woman near the front whispered, "Too many times." Someone else muttered, "Now they care because it's the commissioner's wife." Daniel nodded slowly, hearing every word. "That's the point. This shouldn't require a title to demand justice. It shouldn't take a badge or a press pass or a live stream for someone to be treated like a human being." Lieutenant Wallace shifted uncomfortably, but held his ground. His face remained controlled, but the tightness around his jaw betrayed pressure. Daniel faced him again. "You have a decision to make right now. Are you going to take responsibility in front of these people, or are you going to hide behind paperwork and press releases after we're gone?" Wallace hesitated. "This situation is already under review, and I've initiated disciplinary—" "No," Daniel interrupted. "Don't sidestep this. Don't retreat to policy language. These people don't need internal memos. They need to hear the truth. Here, now." Ruiz, still standing beside the cruiser, remained silent but visibly affected. His eyes darted between Wallace and Blake. Blake said nothing, his arms folded tightly across his chest, face unreadable. Lauren took a step forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't break her composure. "Tell them why you searched my car." Wallace's eyes flicked to her, then back to Daniel. "It was reported that a vehicle matching the description." Lauren interrupted this time, her voice unwavering. "And what was the description? A silver sedan and a woman driver?" "Yes," Wallace said reluctantly. Lauren held his gaze. "That's not a description. That's an excuse." More murmurs from the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Screens glowed brighter. A teenager, Liv commenting on TikTok, whispered into his mic. "It's blowing up. Over 250K watching now. This is going everywhere." Daniel turned back to Blake. "Why did you open her trunk?" Blake didn't answer. "Why did you open her glove box? Why did you dig through her belongings? Why did you deny her the right to make a phone call?" Still silence. Daniel took a step closer. "You see the difference between the badge on my hip and the one on yours? Mine comes with accountability. Yours, apparently, comes with excuses." Blake opened his mouth to respond but stopped. Daniel kept going. "If you had found something in her car, if there had been anything remotely suspicious, you'd have paraded it in front of every camera here. You didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. And that reality makes your actions even more damning." Wallace interjected, trying to regain control. "Commissioner, we will conduct a full investigation, I can assure you." Daniel faced him squarely. "It's already happening, just not by your department. The investigation is live, right now. Every phone out here is part of it. Every repost, every comment, every person watching across the country." He turned to the crowd again. "They want to manage this behind closed doors. They want to de-escalate it on their terms. But the moment they opened that trunk without reason, they lost the right to handle this quietly." A cheer rose from a cluster of younger bystanders. The words "Justice for Lauren" echoed again, louder this time. The live stream viewer count jumped to over 300,000. National hashtags exploded. Media pages picked it up. Celebrities began retweeting the clips. Lauren spoke again. "I wasn't driving erratically. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't belligerent. I was just going home. And because I matched someone's idea of suspicious, I was treated like a suspect." She looked directly into a phone camera. "How many of you have a mother, a sister, a daughter who's been treated the same way but didn't have someone with a badge to show up?" Someone in the crowd shouted. "Too damn many." Daniel stepped toward Wallace. "This is your department. These are your officers. You can't just apologize to me because it's convenient. Apologize to her. Apologize to every person out here who's been on the receiving end of unchecked authority." Wallace looked at Lauren, then at the crowd, then back at Daniel. His mouth was tight, but his words came out clearly. "Mrs. Carter, I apologize for the way you were treated tonight. It was not acceptable, and it does not reflect the standards we claim to uphold." Lauren didn't nod. She didn't say thank you. She stood tall, letting his words settle where they belonged, in the air, not in her hands. Daniel turned to the crowd. "You heard it. Now let's hold them to it." The moment hung heavy. Nothing theatrical. No speeches. Just raw clarity. The illusion of authority without accountability had cracked, and everyone watching knew it. The flashing lights still painted the street, but the quiet murmur of the crowd had changed in tone. It wasn't just local now. Reporters had arrived. Microphones were being clipped to lapels. Portable lights snapped on. News vans parked haphazardly along the curb. Boom mics stretched overhead while producers whispered into earpieces. What had started as a neighborhood disturbance had escalated into a media moment too large to control. Journalists moved with purpose, weaving between onlookers and officers, all trying to capture a quote or angle that hadn't already gone viral. Several had gone live within minutes of stepping out of their vans, broadcasting what was now being dubbed the Carter Stop. Network banners flashed across screens. Police commissioner's wife searched without cause. Viral video sparks outrage in Dallas. Is this what policing looks like after reform? In front of one camera, a reporter stood poised, ready for her cue. Behind her, the street shimmered with light and tension. "Back to you, Jake," she said, wrapping up a segment. "We'll continue monitoring this developing story. But one thing is certain. This incident has ignited a conversation far beyond the streets of Meadow and Knox. Across social media, video clips from different angles flooded platforms. One featured Lauren calmly standing beside her open car as officers rifled through her belongings. Another showed Daniel confronting the officers with quiet authority, calling for accountability. A still frame of Lauren looking directly into the camera had become the symbolic image of the night. Captions ranged from "dignity under fire" to "she didn't raise her voice, but the country heard her." A trending Twitter thread, authored by a civil rights attorney, broke down the legal violations visible in the footage. Each tweet in the thread had thousands of shares. On Instagram, activist pages reposted the clip alongside commentary about systemic abuse. One comment stood out. "She had the badge behind her. Imagine those who don't." Then came the deeper questions. Reporters began digging, not just into the incident, but into the officers involved. Within hours, a freelance investigative journalist named Carla Monroe tweeted a single sentence that shifted the energy again. "This isn't Sergeant Blake's first complaint." That tweet exploded. Monroe followed up with a thread documenting past allegations against Sergeant Mason Blake. One complaint had been filed 4 years earlier by a young black college student who had claimed she was pulled over for looking out of place in a suburban neighborhood. Another, 2 years prior, involved a man whose dash cam captured Blake ordering him out of his vehicle without cause. Neither complaint had resulted in formal discipline. Both had quietly disappeared from public view. People began connecting dots. Screenshots of the earlier cases resurfaced. Old court filings, previously buried in clerical archives, were shared in group chats and community pages. Independent watchdog groups posted breakdowns of officer complaints across the precinct, highlighting how rarely internal investigations led to consequences. The story wasn't just about Lauren anymore. It was about a department, a pattern, a system that had let Blake operate unchecked for years. On cable news, a legal analyst summed it up bluntly. "We've been here before, but this time, the cameras were already rolling when it started." Local politicians released statements. Some offered carefully worded concerns. Others tried to avoid direct comment, waiting to see where public sentiment would fall. But it was already too late for neutrality. By 2 a.m., the clip had reached 1 million views on YouTube. A TikTok video narrated by a young activist surpassed 700,000 likes, paired with the line, "She kept her hands visible. They kept their assumptions louder." At 3:40 a.m., national outlets published early versions of the story. They used phrases like racially charged, high-profile confrontation, and departmental misconduct. One headline read, "Even the police commissioner's family isn't safe. What does that say about the rest of us?" Online forums filled with debate. Some commenters defended the officers, arguing protocol. Others dismantled those claims with timestamps and legal precedent. Public pressure built by the hour. And still, the footage played on loop. By sunrise, the name Lauren Carter trended across 4 platforms. Activists began organizing gatherings. Faith leaders released open letters. An online petition demanding Sergeant Blake's termination gathered over 250,000 signatures before noon. Meanwhile, back at home, Lauren and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside them. The sun filtered through half-closed blinds, casting pale light across the headlines stretched on their devices. Phones buzzed every few seconds. Messages, tags, interview requests. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Lauren scrolled slowly through her screen. "They're already turning it into a hashtag," she said quietly. Daniel looked up from his phone. "It was always going to happen. The minute they saw the video," Lauren nodded. "I just didn't expect it to be me." "You weren't the cause," Daniel replied. "You were the proof." And they sat in silence again, surrounded by the digital storm circling their names. On one screen, a headline scrolled, "Carter Incident Raises New Demands for Police Oversight." Another read, "Public Outcry Grows. How One Night Exposed a Department." Lauren closed the browser and set the phone down. "This isn't just about the stop." "No," Daniel said. "It's about the system that let it happen. And all the times it wasn't recorded." Lauren turned to him. "So what do we do now?" Daniel looked at the tablet in front of him, eyes scanning the newest reports. "We show up, we speak, we make sure they can't walk away from this. Not this time." She picked up her coffee, now lukewarm. "You think they'll actually change anything?" "They won't have a choice," he said. Lauren exhaled. "Then let's make sure it's more than headlines." And the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of Lauren's fingernail against the side of her coffee mug. The sun had fully risen, spilling muted light across the table, but the house still felt like it was holding its breath. The previous night was still heavy in the air, hanging between every word not spoken and every headline still refreshing on their phones. Daniel stood at the sink, scrolling through his inbox, jaw set. Reporters were requesting statements. Community leaders wanted meetings. Civil rights attorneys had offered to speak on camera. Overnight, the street outside had transformed into a protest site. Someone had already left a bouquet of sunflowers at the edge of the lawn with a note that read, "We see you. We believe you." Lauren hadn't touched her toast. She kept reading and rereading a particular comment left under the main live stream post. It had been reposted thousands of times already. She only survived this because she married the system. That line stuck, not because it was cynical, but because it felt close to the truth. Daniel turned to her. "They're calling for a press conference this afternoon, 2 p.m., City Hall. Media will be there, council reps, a few legal observers. I can speak, but if you don't want to be there," Lauren cut him off, her voice quiet but certain. "No, I'll be there." Daniel nodded once, folding his phone into his hand. "We'll keep it focused. Policy failure, oversight, department reform. Keep it on the system, not you." She looked up. "But it was me." He paused. Lauren set the coffee mug down, pushed her chair back slightly, and stood. "I know you want to shield me. You think if we talk about protocols and structures, people won't personalize it. But they already have, and so have I." Daniel didn't interrupt. She walked over to the window, looking out at the street. A news van was parked 2 houses down. A cameraman leaned against the door, smoking. 2 teens on bikes passed by slowly, one pointing toward their driveway. Lauren didn't look away. "Last night, I kept thinking, what if I weren't your wife?" Daniel said nothing. She turned. "What if I had the same car, same dress, same skin, but no last name that mattered? What if it were someone else? A teacher, a waitress, a social worker, standing there with no one coming? What would have happened?" Daniel lowered his gaze. She stepped forward. "They didn't see a threat when you pulled up. They saw a consequence. They didn't back off because they realized they were wrong. They backed off because you had a title." She pulled her phone from the counter, flipping it over in her hand. "Do you know how many women have messaged me already? People I don't know. They all say the same thing. This happened to me too, but I didn't have anyone to call." Daniel looked up. "That's why we speak today. That's why we act." Lauren shook her head. "I'm not talking as your wife today. I'm talking as me. Because I don't want the next woman standing on that sidewalk to have to prove her worth to survive a traffic stop." She crossed her arms. "This isn't about saving the department's image. It's about making sure someone else doesn't have to live stream their own dignity." Daniel moved toward her, setting his phone down on the counter. "I know. I just hate that it had to be you." "It was always going to be someone," Lauren replied. "At least now, they have a face they can't ignore." The silence returned, but it was different now. Not tension, purpose. Lauren walked back to the table and picked up her tablet. A new video had just gone up. It was a stitched edit of last night's footage and the headlines that followed. It ended with a freeze frame of her face and the caption, "What if she weren't married to the commissioner?" She handed it to Daniel. He watched the last few seconds. "They're asking the right question." Lauren's voice was soft. "So let's give them an answer." Outside, another car pulled up. A staffer from the mayor's office stepped out, phone to ear, clipboard in hand. City Hall was already in motion. Lauren went to her bedroom, changed into a navy blue blouse and black slacks. No statement outfit, no designer label, just simple and sharp. She didn't want to look like someone special. She wanted to look like someone ordinary, because that's who this was for. When she re-entered the kitchen, Daniel was already suited up, tying his cufflinks. He looked at her, a flicker of something vulnerable passing through his expression. She picked up her purse. "Ready?" Daniel nodded. "We'll take my car. They're expecting us." As they walked out the door, a reporter across the street tried to call out, but Lauren didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just kept walking. Calm, focused, clear. The door of the black SUV shut behind them. The engine started. They didn't say a word for the first minute of the drive. Lauren finally broke the silence. "I'm not going to say I'm okay," Daniel nodded. You don't have to. I'm going to say it matters. He looked over. It does. The press conference began at exactly 2 p.m. Cameras were already live, satellite feeds blinking green as dozens of news outlets broadcast from the rotunda of Dallas City Hall. Reporters filled every inch of the floor, microphones lined up like rifles at the front of the stage. Flashbulbs popped in rapid bursts. Behind the podium, a city seal glimmered under the soft wash of institutional lighting. The mood in the room was tense, expectant, not the stillness of order, but the breath-holding that happens before a verdict is read. Daniel Carter stepped into view with no written statement in hand. He wore a charcoal gray suit and no smile. He adjusted the microphone only once. Then he raised his head and looked out into a crowd that was no longer just local. Viewers were watching from across the country. Live streams had already reached 6 figures. Within the first 3 seconds, the comments were pouring in. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady. "I won't waste time. What happened last night was unacceptable, inexcusable, and not reflective of the department I have spent my life trying to build." The room stilled. No coughing, no whispering, only the quiet clicks of record buttons and keyboards. At approximately 10:45 p.m. last night, 2 officers under my command stopped a vehicle with no probable cause. They proceeded to search that vehicle without consent, without a warrant, and without explanation. They denied the occupant the right to contact her family. They carried out a full vehicle inspection, not in response to threat or evidence, but based solely on a vague vehicle description and personal bias. A beat. That vehicle belonged to my wife. The room reacted with a subtle intake of breath. No one was surprised, but the weight of hearing it said aloud was something else entirely. Daniel continued. "Her name is Lauren Carter, and while I'm sure many of you know that by now, I want to be clear, this isn't about who she is. It's about what was done to her, and what that says about how many others have been treated the same way without anyone ever knowing their name." He gripped at the edge of the podium lightly, voice gaining force. "This department exists to protect and serve. It does not exist to intimidate and humiliate. It does not exist to operate without oversight. And when it does, when our policies are ignored, when our power is misused, we must not defend it. We must confront it." He scanned the crowd of reporters. Some were nodding. Some had gone completely still. "Effective this morning, both officers involved have been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal investigation. Their body cam footage has been submitted for immediate review, and I have ordered that an independent civilian oversight committee be included in that process from the very beginning. No redactions, no delays, no spin." The whispers among media personnel picked up now. Headlines were already being drafted. Editors were cutting footage mid-sentence to post. Daniel pressed on. "Additionally, I have authorized a department-wide audit of all stops conducted over the last 2 years that resulted in a warrantless search. Any case that shows similar patterns will be reopened. We will re-examine the circumstances. We will question what we overlooked, and if necessary, we will take disciplinary action against officers who abuse their discretion." A hand shot up from the front row. "Commissioner, are you calling this an isolated incident or part of a systemic issue?" Daniel didn't pause. "It's systemic. The fact that my wife was targeted despite following every rule shows that training alone is not enough. Policy alone is not enough. We are dealing with a mindset problem, one that exists beneath the surface of our procedures, and it must be rooted out." Another reporter stood. "Commissioner Carter, do you believe race played a role in the decision to stop and search her vehicle?" Daniel met the reporter's gaze directly. "Yes, I do, and if it had been anyone else in that car, someone without a high-profile spouse or a platform, there's no telling how far the situation might have escalated. That's the point. The system should not function one way for the privileged and another way for the vulnerable. Camera shutters flared again. News tickers updated in real time. On social media, the press conference was trending under multiple hashtags. Carter response, not above the law, hatch systemic truth. Daniel wasn't finished. In the coming days, I will meet with community leaders, legal experts, and civil rights advocates to discuss deeper reforms, not just for the Dallas County Police Department, but as a model that other jurisdictions can follow. This cannot be a singular response to a viral moment. It must be the beginning of a structural shift. He paused again and looked directly into one of the network cameras. To the public, I am not asking for patience. I am not asking for forgiveness on behalf of the officers. I am asking for vigilance. Keep watching. Keep questioning. Because real accountability doesn't happen in moments like this. It happens in the days and weeks after, when no one is watching anymore. Reporters began raising their hands again, but Daniel shook his head once. I've said what I needed to say, but there's one more voice you need to hear today. Not because of her connection to me, but because of her experience. Because last night, she didn't speak. She stood silent while others made decisions around her, over her, and against her. And now it's her turn. He stepped back from the podium. Lauren Carter walked forward. The crowd shifted again, this time more subtly. An air of anticipation that came not from curiosity, but from respect. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She didn't hesitate. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she took her place behind the microphone. She stood there for a moment. Then she raised her eyes. Lauren stood at the podium with the full weight of the room pressing in. The lights were harsh, blinding even, but she didn't squint. She kept her head level, her shoulders squared, and her hands resting gently on the sides of the lectern. Behind the cameras, the crowd had gone still. Even the reporters who'd been frantically typing during Daniel's speech were quiet now. Everyone waited. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence work. Then her voice came, steady and measured. I was just trying to get home. A pause. I'd spent the evening at a fundraiser for the Unity Center, something I've been doing for years. I spoke on mentorship programs, on building safer, stronger communities, on the importance of trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. She looked down once, then up again. On the way home, I got pulled over. Her voice didn't shake. I wasn't speeding. I didn't run a stop sign. I used my signal. My tail lights worked. There was no traffic violation. There was no warning. Just red and blue lights and a command to stop. A camera light clicked on in the corner. Another lens zoomed. Lauren continued. When the officer came to my window, I asked why I'd been stopped. He said my car matched a description. He didn't say a what. He didn't ask me where I was going. He didn't treat me like a citizen. He treated me like a suspect. Her voice didn't rise, but the power in it grew. I gave him my license and registration. I kept my hands on the wheel. I stayed calm. I complied with every instruction, and it didn't matter. Another pause. They told me to step out of the car. They searched my trunk, my glove box, my event materials. They treated my personal belongings like evidence. They denied my request to call my husband. They never read me my rights. They never told me what law I'd broken. They never found anything because there was nothing to find. A hush had fallen over the press room. Some in the crowd shifted in their seats. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Reporters glanced at each other without speaking. Lauren kept her gaze forward. I did everything right, she said, and still, I was seen as a threat. Those words landed with force. The microphones didn't move, but the energy in the room changed. That sentence, the simplicity of it, cut through legal jargon and policy statements. It was unfiltered. It was undeniable. I wasn't loud. I wasn't rude. I wasn't resisting, but none of that could change the fact that, in their eyes, I was not someone to protect. I was someone to control. Her fingers curled slightly against the lectern. I wasn't wearing a hoodie. I wasn't holding a phone that could be mistaken for a weapon. I wasn't angry or confrontational. I was in a floor-length dress and heels. And still, they searched me. Still, they looked at me like I didn't belong on that street. A cough from the back of the room, the sound of a camera refocusing. No one interrupted. Lauren's voice softened but didn't lose strength. What happened to me didn't happen because of a broken tail light. It didn't happen because of a call about a suspicious vehicle. It happened because someone saw me and made a decision based on fear, not fact. She looked directly into one of the national news cameras. And that decision was dangerous. Not just to me, but to anyone who looks like me. Anyone who walks into a situation knowing that their skin color will be interpreted before their actions are. Her breathing remained calm. I am lucky, she said plainly, because when I asked to make a phone call, I had someone who could come. I had someone in power who would be listened to. But that should never be the difference between safety and silence. She stepped back slightly, then forward again. Not everyone has a Daniel Carter. Not everyone has a badge behind their name. So what happens to them? What happens when the officer who stops them doesn't have to explain why? When the search goes further? When the assumptions go unchecked? When the footage is never captured? Another shift in the crowd. Phones were being raised again, not just by press, but by citizens in the back row. They weren't just recording for documentation now. They were capturing something they wanted to remember. A truth they didn't want diluted. Lauren nodded once to herself, then she finished. I'm not here today as someone seeking revenge. I'm not here as the wife of a police commissioner. I'm here as a citizen who followed every rule and was still treated like an exception. She stepped away from the microphone, then turned briefly to the side, looking at Daniel, who stood just off stage. He didn't move, didn't signal, but the look they exchanged said everything. Then Lauren faced the audience again. I've told my story, and now I want to listen to yours, because I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. But we have a chance to make it matter. She gave a single nod and stepped back from the podium. The applause started small. A few hands in the back, then more. Louder, sustained. It wasn't a political ovation. It was recognition. It was release. Daniel joined her at her side. They didn't speak as the clapping continued. Neither of them smiled. They just stood there, side by side, eyes steady. In the corner of the room, a producer received a message through his earpiece. He whispered it to his anchor. Internal Affairs just leaked something. Big. The anchor leaned in. What kind of big? The producer's expression shifted. Sergeant, Blake has a sealed record. Something no one knew about. Until now. The Office of Internal Affairs was tucked into a bland municipal building with no signage other than a small metal plate on the wall beside the elevator. Inside, the walls were lined with file cabinets and soundproofed glass. Everything was beige, clean, and designed to be forgettable. But on that morning, the files coming out of one locked cabinet were anything but. Detective Kara Edmonds slid a sealed envelope across the desk to Lieutenant Wallace. Her expression was neutral, but there was tension in her shoulders. Across from her, Wallace sat rigid, scanning the label on the front of the file. It was stamped, restricted, internal use only. In smaller print, it listed the subject, Sergeant Mason Blake. Wallace hesitated, then opened the envelope and pulled out the paperwork inside. The pages were thick with annotations, typed reports, handwritten statements, disciplinary review notes, and one particularly troubling memo dated 3 years earlier. The contents detailed a complaint from a 22-year-old graduate student named Nicole Hart. She'd been pulled over by Sergeant Blake late one evening while driving through her own neighborhood. According to her testimony, Blake accused her of stealing the vehicle, ordered her to step out at gunpoint, and detained her on the curb for 30 minutes while backup arrived. Her registration and ID were both valid. She had no criminal record. She was released without charges, but the complaint she filed afterward never progressed past the intake stage. Wallace flipped to the next page. There were more. A second incident involved a schoolteacher, Jamal Price, who alleged that Blake had stopped him outside a convenience store, claiming he fit the description of someone suspected of theft. When Price asked for details, Blake allegedly threatened to arrest him for obstruction. Price filed a complaint. It was marked pending review, and then quietly closed 2 months later without follow-up. Wallace leaned back in his chair, letting the papers fall onto the desk in front of him. Edmonds crossed her arms. "These weren't buried," she said. "They were shelved, different classification, sealed under administrative review instead of internal misconduct. That's how it got past oversight." He rubbed his temples. "Who authorized the reclassification?" "No signature," she replied, "but someone made sure they didn't go any further." Wallace didn't speak for a moment. He simply stared at the file. Daniel Carter arrived 15 minutes later. He entered the room without fanfare, without a greeting. Wallace stood when he entered. Edmonds gathered the documents and slid them into a fresh folder, placing it in front of Daniel as he sat. Daniel opened it slowly. He read in silence for nearly 5 minutes. No one interrupted. When he finally looked up, his voice was low. "You knew?" Wallace's response was immediate, but uncertain. "Not like this. I had heard there were complaints, but they were flagged as minor. Handled, processed." Daniel's expression didn't change. "Processed into what? A drawer? A quiet corner of the building no one ever opens unless something explodes in public?" Wallace didn't answer. Daniel stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the courthouse parking lot. Then he turned back. "You put this man on the street. You gave him a badge, a weapon, and a license to escalate based on his own judgment. And he's shown a pattern of judgment that is biased, dangerous, and consistently shielded by technicalities." Wallace straightened. "Commissioner, I understand your anger, but with respect, no." Daniel cut in sharply. "Don't ask for respect when you've tolerated negligence. Don't hide behind protocol when someone else had to go through hell for you to pay attention." He stepped forward, hands on the table. "This isn't just about Lauren anymore. This is about how many others were treated the same way, who didn't have cameras, who didn't have a press conference, who just had to go home and pretend like nothing happened." Wallace didn't argue. Daniel turned to Edmonds. "I want this file fully unsealed. I want every name contacted, every case reopened, and I want a full accounting made public within 72 hours. She nodded. "Understood." "And Blake?" Daniel asked. Wallace swallowed. "He's been notified. He's on his way here." Daniel glanced at his watch. "Good. He's not leaving with a badge." Exactly 12 minutes later, Blake walked through the doors of the Internal Affairs Office with a stiff expression and an attitude that bordered on defensive arrogance. He was in uniform. No apology in his posture, no guilt in his eyes. Wallace met him at the door and ushered him into the conference room where Daniel and Edmonds waited. The file sat in the center of the table. Blake's eyes landed on it and his jaw tightened. Daniel didn't let him speak. "You know what this is?" Blake nodded once. "You had multiple opportunities to course correct," Daniel continued. "Instead, you escalated. You intimidated. You abused the public trust and wore a uniform to protect yourself while doing it." Blake didn't respond. "This department cannot and will not protect you anymore." Daniel placed a resignation form on the table in front of him. "You will step down today, or I will recommend termination and initiate criminal review of every incident in this file." Blake's eyes lingered on the paper. He didn't touch it, but after several seconds he nodded again. I'll sign." He took the pen, wrote his name with a shaken hand, and stood. No handshakes, no farewells. He left without looking back. After he was gone, Edmonds looked at Daniel. "What about Ruiz?" "Call him in," Daniel said. "Give him the chance to speak. If he's willing, let him testify. We need someone who was there, someone who can help us clean this up from the inside." Edmonds nodded and left the room. Daniel remained at the table for a moment longer. He stared at the signed resignation, then at the file, and, for the first time since the night before, he exhaled, not in relief, but in readiness. The Police Oversight Committee met on the third floor of the downtown municipal building, in a windowless conference room with dull carpet, beige walls, and a circular table designed to imply equality but rarely achieve it. On this particular afternoon, every seat was filled. Members of the Civilian Review Board sat on one side, Internal Affairs on the other. At the far end, Commissioner Daniel Carter observed silently, flanked by legal advisors and policy analysts. The room was tense but quiet, the kind of quiet that follows exposure and waits for accountability. Officer Kevin Ruiz sat at the center of it all. He wore his dress blues, the collar ironed stiff, the badge polished to a muted shine. His posture was upright, but his hands trembled slightly as he opened the prepared statement before him. Across from him, Lauren Carter sat alongside her attorney and two community observers. She said nothing, but her eyes never left him. Ruiz cleared his throat. "My name is Officer Kevin Ruiz. I've served with the Dallas County Police Department for 6 years. Until last week, I believed I understood what it meant to serve honorably. I followed procedure. I followed orders. I believed that was enough." He paused. "On the night of the incident involving Mrs. Lauren Carter, I failed to act when I should have. I witnessed a search conducted without cause. I heard objections dismissed. I saw an innocent woman treated like a criminal, and I did not stop it. I stood by, quiet, while rights were disregarded in front of me." He looked up, directly at Lauren. "I cannot undo what happened that night, but I can tell the truth now, and I can tell you this: I am sorry. Not because the world found out, but because I should have spoken up long before anyone pressed record." The room remained silent. Ruiz continued. "When Internal Affairs approached me, I agreed to cooperate fully. I've submitted my body cam footage, written a full account of the incident, and provided names, timestamps, and records of previous situations in which similar conduct went unreported. I have nothing to gain from this. No promotion, no protection. But if my silence allowed harm, then maybe my honesty can prevent more of it." He turned his attention to the committee now. "I understand the consequences. I understand the risk. I know this makes me a target inside the department, but the truth matters more than tradition. I'm willing to testify publicly and under oath. And if my position within the force is compromised, I will accept that. But I will not protect misconduct ever again." A long silence followed. Lauren leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but clear. "Officer Ruiz, why didn't you stop it in the moment?" Ruiz didn't flinch. "Fear, loyalty, pressure, all of the wrong reasons. I thought silence was safer, but silence is how this keeps happening." One of the civilian board members asked, "What do you want us to do with your statement?" "Use it," Ruiz said, "however you need. As evidence, as a start. Just don't ignore it." Commissioner Carter spoke then for the first time in the meeting. "We won't?" Lauren stood and faced him. "I accept your apology, but I hope you know it wasn't just me you stood silent on. It was every person who came before me. Every one of them deserves that same truth." Ruiz nodded, eyes down. "I know." Later that afternoon, the department released a public statement. It confirmed that Ruiz had been granted whistleblower protections under the city's internal integrity policy. He would retain his position pending ongoing investigations and would be reassigned to the Training and Ethics Division to assist in rewriting the department's Field Protocol Handbook. The reaction was immediate. Some officers within the department praised his courage, others labeled him disloyal. But across the community, the response was overwhelmingly different. Social media lit up with messages of support, not just for Lauren but for Ruiz. People debated what it meant for change to come from within. Hashtags like #TruthInside the badge and #Ruiz Speaks trended nationally. Local schools invited him to speak at criminal justice forums. Civil rights organizations began citing his statement as a model of transparent accountability. Activists still demanded broader reform, but something had shifted. For the first time, someone from inside had chosen the public over protectionism. The next day, Ruiz gave an interview to a local news affiliate. He wore plain clothes and spoke softly but firmly. "There's a difference between being a good cop and being a silent one," he said. "I stayed quiet for too long. That won't happen again." Meanwhile, Lauren received an invitation from the National Legal Advocacy Conference to speak at their upcoming summit in Washington, D.C. She declined at first, unsure if her voice belonged in that arena. But after a call from a public defender who had seen her testimony and said it had changed how her clients viewed justice, Lauren reconsidered. Within 48 hours, she confirmed attendance at not one but 3 events: a civil liberties forum in Chicago, a university lecture at Howard, and a panel at the National Bar Association on Community Police Trust. At her next public event, a young law student approached her afterward. "When you said you did everything right and it still happened, I felt that. I think we all did," Lauren replied. "Then let's make sure no one forgets it." Back at the Oversight Committee's office, a mural sketch had been pinned to the wall, one that depicted not just Lauren, but also the moment Ruiz had stood in front of the city and told the truth. The tagline at the bottom was simple: "Courage isn't a title, it's a decision." Lauren Carter turned fear into action and silence into structure. Through her voice and the Know Your Rights program, she reminded us that being heard shouldn't require a title. It should only require truth. Now, the question is yours. If it happened to you, would you know what to say? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every voice matters, and the next one might be yours.